of the twigs, secured with a little wood glue. And the finished tree appears something like these.
There's a tendency amongst all of us to make our trees far too small for our layout. You don't realize it, but a tree, a pine or an oak, for a 4mm scale layout has to be 12 inches. That's nearly 30 centimeters in height. Much, much bigger than you think. And coming back to layouts, Martin Brent has some very positive ideas of how to build them.
My model of Rye Harbour is based very much on the East Sussex scene. I've stretched the area perhaps a bit to take in a bit of the coastline around Rye, and I've built a railway that runs from Rye down to the sea. In fact, it bears little or no relationship to the real area, but in the model I've incorporated several features from perhaps my past or that are personal to me, things that I remember. In the harbour area there are some net sheds that the fishermen used to hang their nets to dry in before the days of man-made materials. There's a little boatyard that I used to have to visit in the course of my job. I had to have a pub on the layout, but the actual area available was rather small. Eventually, I used my mother's house as a basis for the model, but called it after the pub that I used to regard as my local. This type of thing gives a layout life and makes it more interesting. There's more to a model than just the actual railway. There's the landscape around it. One of the things I do feel is that you should be able to look at a station, a model of a station with no trains there, and be able to say, that's Sussex, or that's Devon, or you should be able to place the model by its surroundings. If you're going to build buildings that look like the real thing, real houses, the stations, and find out how they were built, and base your models on prototypes. It's all too easy to build a house from your imagination and then find that it is completely impossible and it looks wrong. All of the structures on my layouts are based on prototypes from East Sussex. When I go around the country, I take a camera with me, and perhaps a sketch pad as well. If I see a building I like, I'll stop, take a couple of photographs and store it away for a rainy day, and then when I'm building a layout, perhaps I might be able to incorporate either a complete building or some features of a building. It's the actual enjoyment you get from creating something that is very personal. I've incorporated in my model of Rye Harbour a lot of personal touches. Perhaps a touch of vanity is the photographer by the level crossing, which is meant to be me, because around the time of the model I was in that part of the country photographing railways for all I was worth, because they were going to disappear. And it was something that I was going to miss.
Once again, Rye Harbour is a very popular layout at exhibitions, and Martin is very cunning, creating little scenes, little slices of life to create an atmosphere.
If we take this track gang as an example, normally they'd be engaged in repairing the track along here. But because they can't move, we can't run trains round them. Here, we put a 5-mile-an-hour speed restriction there, and here we have the gang busily engaged in repairing the landslip. Even mistakes can be turned to one's advantage. Here, I spilled a drop of paint when putting the boat shed in. Rather than try and wipe it out, I extended the paint so that it looked as if oil was leaking from the barrel.
Well, Frank Dyer's Borchester Market is an extensive 4mm scale layout running on 16.5mm gauge. It's based on British Rail Eastern Region practice in the late 50s. And every inch of the 10 by 13-foot layout is packed with interest. Frank is an inveterate showman, and he likes nothing better than to go to exhibitions. And there he makes sure that Borchester Market is run exactly as the prototype.
Now, this is an entirely imaginary place, but it's set in a real enough location. Some 10 miles to the northwest of Newark, rather on the edge of the Dukeries country. It's not on a main line, it's on a line which in fact nearly did get built in reality in the 1880s, and of course its reason for its existence was coal. The railway itself represents, of course, part of the line. You can't represent a complete railway because a railway is a thing very much of length. So I represent the terminus station of this town, Borchester, and a little bit of the line disappearing through tunnels in the hills. If you were standing beside a railway line watching the trains, that is what you would see. You'd see a little bit of railway line. The trains come into it from somewhere and they disappear to somewhere. This is what I try to show, the train watching scene. But as regards the actual movement of the trains, the way they run, how a railway operates, we try to reproduce this as accurately as we know how. On a real railway, especially at a busy station, a watcher would notice that a lot of things can happen at the same time. And very often you get many completely independent movements taking place on different lines, interweaving of movements very often. For this reason, we work to a pretty complicated schedule. And we have 3 operators that work on the station here, and we can make at least 3 movements at any one time. This is not easy. There's very little automatic. It's nearly all done with manual controls requiring great concentration on the part of the operators. This is deliberate because when you have to concentrate on doing a job properly like this, this is when you achieve the maximum of fun and interest out of it. Now there's a lot more in running one train than just a single movement. In fact, it is a complete story. Let's imagine, for instance, that we had an express train running from Borchester Market to London. And so, at the appropriate moment, a little engine, which normally spends its life fussing around the stations, pushing coaches here and vans there, brings into the platform a long rake of coaches. Once in the platform, the little engine uncouples. Meanwhile, in the locomotive yard, the engine which is going to take this train to London is being prepared, and at a few minutes before departure time this locomotive backs onto the train, and attention now focuses on the signal box which controls all the movements. And before this train can move out, he has got to get permission for it to do so. He's got to make sure that the line is clear. So he communicates to the next signal box up the line. In this case it's called Wellow East Junction, ringing a special prepared code of bells. The man at Wellow Junction replies back. And what in fact is happening is that the signalman is asking, is the line clear for me to send an express passenger train to Wellow East Junction? First of all, you see the signals across the throat of the station lift, that is, they clear, which means to say the train may proceed. And as the train gathers speed, the signalman signals to the box that the train is on its way. So the departure of one train is quite a story. When you imagine a lot of complicated moves taking place all together at the same time, then you realise that model railwaying is not only an art, but is quite a science as well.
So far, we've seen 4 mill-scale layouts running on track gauges of 16.5 and 18.2 millimeters. But now, let's have a look at Dave Lowry's layout. That runs on a prototypical scale track of 18.83 millimeters.
My layout is called Beverley's. It is a small branch line, and it is my interpretation of 1883 modelling. It's my first real attempt at 1883 modelling, and I suppose it's been the result of some 5 years' work. The period it runs from is from about 1910 to 1915. And when I first joined the club, the Amateur Model Railway Society, many years ago, the chairman there was an expert on London North Western coaching, and I felt this was an area perhaps I could have a go at to create my own thing. So I chose the London North Western. There's no strict prototype for this layout. It basically started off as a test track, which became scenified after a little while. There are many aspects on the layout which I think was very rarely found in a prototype of this size. So it's basically, it's all fictitious. Most of the scenery has a polystyrene base, and once you've laid the track and cut the baseboard to fit it, it's infilled with polystyrene, which is shaped. Polystyrene I then paint green to hide the awful white colour, and from this you can start to contour and create your own scenery. Most of the scenery has a flock base with the various grasses glued down, and this gives you a good working surface.
Yes, Dave's quite right, it does look good. And look at the green grass on the occupation crossing, seldom modelled. A rail motor just pulls into the station, and there it is, there's somebody in the station building, and out goes the rail motor, and straight into the fiddle yard. Mind you, that's something everyone needs, a fiddle yard in a layout, and the smaller the layout, the more important the fiddle yard. He's got 3 tracks on the traverser, and so all he has to do is wind the handle until he lines up something that he wants to come out from the fiddle yard.
Starting from the traverser end of the layout, you can first of all arrive at the small station. This is only a very small building. In fact, there is quite an absence of buildings on the layout. From the station, you go past a small coaling stage. This is for small locomotives. There's water cranes. There's a small gate which is opened as a train will arrive and departs. At the end of the same road, there's a small cattle dock, which is capable of handling 2 cattle wagons, or occasionally has a permanent way wagon at the end. On the opposite side, you have a small siding which handles the coal traffic and also the goods traffic. As we go under the bridge, the stream moves into the small canal basin, and the siding off onto the left there carries some fish, coal, any sort of traffic that side. We then pass through under the next bridge and into the final little halt at the other end.
And finally, in our line-side look at model railways, we visit Bromford and High Peak. It's a magnificent 7mm O-gauge layout. Bromford and High Peak has been developed in 3 stages since 1972. Full-length express and freight trains running at scale speeds are a practical proposition on such a large layout, which after all covers an area of 60 by 30 feet. The locomotives and rolling stock are models of prototypes running in the late 1930s. The large area the layout covers is used to good effect, with magnificent bridges, buildings, signals and scenery. The line is based on an imaginary area in the Midlands. High Peak is situated somewhere near Birmingham and is built just passing through the station, as the Great Western Parcels train travels in the opposite direction.